After the floods, state and local response. Indiana GOP backs a new leader. And Braun celebrates a year of school choice. From the television studios at WFYI Public Media, it's Indiana Week in Review for the week ending August 21st, 2026.
Indiana Week in Review is produced by WFYI in association with Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations. Additional support is provided by Par Ritchie.
Communities across the state are cleaning up after devastating floods and storms hit Indiana. An estimate on how much damage was sustained has not been given, but more than 1,000 people were displaced from their homes, and some cities experienced significant damage to infrastructure. Caroline Beck has more on the response from Indiana Governor Mike Braun following the floods.
Governor Braun is requesting a federal disaster declaration through FEMA to help pay for things like individual assistance and hazard mitigation. Braun says the state is collecting data on the total damage right now and hopes to hear back from FEMA in the next 10 days.
It'll be as quickly as it can get done. It takes a while to compile all that, and we got a good relationship with the administration. So I think we'll be in a place to where we will know how to expedite it. We got to see what it is, and we go from there.
Homeowners can submit damage reports and request temporary help, including housing assistance, with the state.
So how successful has the state and local response been? It's the first question for our Indiana Week in Review panel. Democrat Lara Beck. Republican Joey Fox. Oseye Boyd, editor-in-chief at Mirror Indy. And Leslie Bonilla Muñiz, reporter at Indiana Capital Chronicle. I'm Jill Sheridan, managing editor at WFYI. So, Laura, how do you think the state's been handling the response after this devastating natural disaster?
Well, I think the state has really been doing the best job they can, and I think they have done a really remarkable job, because when you think about it, we didn't just have the flooding, we had all of the terrible rains, we had the power outages, we've had really some unprecedented weather events, and I think we're going to continue to see those as we continue to go further with climate change. So I think the initial response has been really good. I think there's been some good communications, with the exception of NIPSCO, in terms of making sure, in terms of that. I think my biggest concern now is what's next. We are now looking at massive amounts of federal aid that we're going to need, and you've got the Trump administration saying, yeah, states may have to pay for that. And you also have local response agencies on the ground in municipalities, and all of these local governments are dealing with the effects of Senate Enrolled Act 1. So they have less money to work with. That's less public works people they have to, clear out the streets and just clear out the storm drains. And Joey's making a face at me. I can see you out of the corner of my eye, Joey. So I think it really does put a strain on local governments, and that to me is a really concerning impact, especially as they're heading into budget season.
Well, and also the governor is filing for a major disaster declaration. The state's sort of waiting on that to see whether or not we'll be able to get that, and that would provide more funding. And the governor said he feels confident in his relationship with the White House, and that may come through for Indiana.
I expect that it will. This governor is very close with the president. I expect that declaration will go in. Laura's point about local government, though, I think is interesting, because you had two displays of Republican competence and Democrat incompetence. If you look just north in Hamilton County,
the body isn't even cool.
You had just north in Hamilton County, Mayor Sue Finkham built a dam in the middle of a flood. Chris Jensen's been doing an amazing job up in Noblesville. And then you had the lack of communication here in a Democrat-controlled city, in Indianapolis, with Mayor Hogsett. I think the state response, and you've seen some really competent response. I think Hoosiers should be pretty proud so far, but we've got a long way to go. And certainly praying for everybody that's still without power, and folks that are going to have to rebuild their lives.
It's hard to believe it's just been just over a week. Actually, it was Tuesday that the major storms hit Northwest Indiana. We have heard a little criticism here in the capital city about response, mostly in the form of communication. Have you heard that as well, Oseye?
Yeah, it seems like the communication was not quite where it needed to be, and so I think what's going to have to happen for Indianapolis is they're going to have to revisit what happened and what what can we do better? Because this was unprecedented. I know there are areas of the city that are used to flooding, but a lot of this was never seen historic levels before. And so many people don't have flood insurance. We don't need flood insurance, we've been told, but now I have to reconsider that. I think in Gary, there's the NIPSCO issue. So there's communication with NIPSCO not doing a good enough job, as well as the optics. There are optics that looks like, in the city that has a predominantly black community, you're not communicating well with people, and it'll be coming up on 2 weeks, I think, really soon. Without power, what does that mean? And when you have transformers that are down, what does that mean? When you it's not just electricity; it is actually transformers, not power lines. So does that mean they have to be rebuilt? So I think there could be better communication, just so people know what they need to do and where they need to go. When you have people that have health issues that need electricity for oxygen or other machines, that what happens to those people? What happens to food? Where do you go get more food? So there's a lot of issues that we will have to reconsider and revisit, especially if we're going to have more of these, which it sounds like we will.
Leslie, we've not heard an official number, but we can only imagine that it's well into the billions of dollars in damage that the state and cities and personal property has been sustained here. But we did see the governor quickly put into place housing vouchers and $5,000 for families that are impacted. Do you think this has made a difference as we've come a week into this disaster?
I think it was really promising how quickly they were able to make those announcements and open that up to applications, but we don't know yet how effective that has been, how quickly that aid can move out to people, and the kind of success rate that we're seeing there, because you do need to provide evidence, documents that might be difficult for people. So I think that's another thing that we're gonna have to follow up on and see how much are they able to deliver on this help. Help is only helpful when it actually gets to the people that need it. So that's definitely something that
the state using 211 as well, which is a really important tool for anybody that needs services, social services, and also to assess the amount.
211 is important, and I think you've also seen too. I even noticed Rafael Sanchez, who we all know from Fox, who's a friend of many of us, and he was even on social media talking about, here's what you need to do, here's what you need to know. So I think a lot of people are really using different ways to connect. Going back to communications, though, one of the things I think is local elected officials are often at the very ground level. And the Friday night of the flooding, I noticed on Instagram, Councilor Jones, Kristen Jones, John Barth, and Brianne Delaney were going door to door in the dark in Rocky Ripple, communicating with people and talking with people. And I think that's where you really see public servants at their best. And the three of them really got their colleagues together and really did some great work over the weekend.
City County Council. You did mention, though, the infrastructure work in Hamilton County, and it has been pretty remarkable to see that type of response.
That she built a dam in the middle of a flood.
They were told that there was nothing you could do, and in fact,
it's a little Hoosier ingenuity.
Hoosier ingenuity.
Maybe some Purdue grads.
and some Purdue grads, yes.
Well, a lot of work still for a lot of communities. It's time now for viewer feedback. Every week we pose an unscientific online poll question. This week's question: has the state's response to the floods been adequate? Vote yes or no. The last question posed to viewers: is the state on the right track with standardized testing methods? This was exactly the same respondents here, 50% saying yes and 50% saying no. If you would like to take part in the poll, go to WFYI.org/IWIR and look for the poll. Leadership of the Indiana Senate continues to solidify around one of redistricting's strongest supporters. Ben Thorpe reports Senate Republicans have endorsed Senator Chris Garten for the position of pro tem, likely handing him leadership of the Indiana Senate.
Garten gained national attention in December after making a spirited defense of redistricting on the Senate floor.
Some will say these maps are political. Let me be clear. You're damn right they are.
Senate President Pro Tem Rodric Bray, who opposed redistricting, recently announced he would step down. Garten won't be officially taking up the role until after the November election. In a statement, Garten said he would bring, quote, unapologetic conservatism, decisive action, and absolute transparency to the Indiana State House.
So, Joey, is it a surprise that, no one else sort of threw their hat in the ring for this position?
I don't think so. I think that this makes a lot of political sense. You have had, it's been about a year since the president started to call for redistricting. We went through December. We had the legislative session. We had the primaries, right? And the president's candidates were much more successful. In that, you have now a new caucus. You've lost, I think, 5 committee chairs that are there. I think what the Senate Republicans think they needed was a solid foundation to go into this campaign season, into the fall. And Senator Garten had thrown his hat into the ring first, and had tried to build a coalition, and he was clearly successful in doing that. It's a new day in the Indiana Senate.
I mean, certainly it will not be boring, all of us watching the legislature next year, Lara, but he brings up redistricting where, hearing sort of a little bit back and forth, but also that maybe legislators will not have the will to do redistricting again.
Well, when you look back at a number of the polls that came out ahead of redistricting, and as redistricting was going through, it was not popular with the general electorate. I mean, it is popular with Republicans, but not with the rest of the general electorate. And I think it is sort of, he can certainly twist a phrase, that's for sure. And I guess I do appreciate that, he at least stood up and said, yeah, redistricting is political. At least he's candid in that, at least he's being frank about it. But what also is going to be really interesting to me is that after we head into the midterms and then as we head into the next General Assembly, anytime you tack too far in one direction, it tends to backfire on you. And I'm thinking about, Mike Pence and RFRA, and especially as you're heading into a gubernatorial year. And a lot of times those mayoral races can be bellwethers for how things are going to go. So he certainly is going to have his work cut out for him as he navigates this session.
That's something that we heard from him, Leslie, was that he would lead with transparency. So can we expect that, that will be a major component of Senator Garten's leadership as we move into the new session?
I think we'll definitely see a different leadership style, whereas Senator Bray I would probably consider him pretty understated, pretty moderated in his tone and how he, flexes his power publicly. Whereas Senator Garten is, I would say, very bold, maybe a little bit brash, and pretty commanding. I think he'll have a more out there leadership style, in terms of enthusiasm and volume. No one will have trouble hearing him, I think. But in terms of how the goals that they're trying to accomplish, honestly, they are all very conservative, and I don't necessarily think, redistricting was certainly a place that they split, but I don't necessarily think that despite the change in tone, the content would change to such a great degree.
And we've heard, from the president as well, who supports this move, but Senator Bray will stay, and he will still be and in the Senate. And do you think he'll still have influence?
Oh, yeah, I think he will. He's been there for a long time. And I will say I agree with Leslie that Republicans have been in the supermajority for a long time. So I don't necessarily see that there will be a big change, because it makes me, when you talk about transparency and conservatism, I think hasn't that always been there? So what we're doing? So what are we doing different? I think it's the personalities that will be different. I don't think, and maybe we'll see more bills like firing squads come up. That was one of his previously authored bills. Maybe we'll see more of that. But I feel like it's kind of going to be the same. It's been Republicans and it's going to stay Republicans.
Other than redistricting, they've been voting in step a lot. Well, it will be interesting. Indiana spends close to $500 million in taxpayer funds to help families afford tuition at private or religious schools. Caroline Beck reports on how this school year is the first time all students in the state qualify for a voucher.
To get a voucher, previously students had to meet certain income requirements or be leaving the public school system for private school. Last year, state lawmakers removed all requirements, making Indiana's voucher program one of the most expansive in the country. Governor Mike Braun says when it comes to continuing school choice in Indiana, he wants to fund what works.
Remember, more isn't always going to be the answer. Actually, those entities that are most successful find out how to do things better, and they get by with less and do more.
Opponents of the vouchers say it's now a subsidy for wealthy families already paying full tuition and diverts needed funding away from public schools.
So, Oseye, do you think it's time to celebrate school choice in Indiana?
Well, the governor definitely is. I think he was at Cardinal Ritter yesterday celebrating. So for those families, I don't begrudge any family for trying to choose what is the best place to educate their children. I think that is a personal decision. And as a parent who's had a child in private and a child in public, I think that's something that you can do for your children. But I will say that this idea that it is universal now, we are still talking about a lot of rural places in the state don't have choice. There's not schools for them to send their kids to. And also, it covers tuition and some fees, but does it cover full tuition? Depends on the school you are choosing. It also, there's no transportation for a lot of private schools. So how do you get your child to private school, especially if you don't, if you live in a rural place that doesn't have a private school? So I think there's a lot of, while there's, it's a great thing to tout, but there are still a lot of people who can't access it. And part of why charter schools came was to kind of give that private school feel for public school students. So what happens to charter schools, especially now that we have more and more charter schools and we have so many schools have referendums on the ballot because they need money. So all these things work, they'll play a role in how public schools are affected and who can actually use the vouchers.
Well, the voucher system was started in Indiana in 2011, I believe, as a way to reach more low-income children, to give them different options, and it's evolved in the state throughout the years, and now available to everyone. But the numbers show that not necessarily it's reaching everyone. I mean, what have you seen as far as school choice and how it's evolved in the state, Leslie?
Right, I think to what Oseye mentioned, where people in rural areas don't necessarily have those options, as well as low-income families that do have private schools like geographically available to them but cannot afford the rest of the payment that the voucher doesn't cover. I think there is a question about whether it's in serving its original intended purpose. But I think the other question is that the state's job to try and fill in that gap with transportation and, even trying to fill in what, like beyond what the voucher can pay for, because then we're talking about even greater state investment into this program. And it's a topic of discussion during every budget session, obviously. And I just think it'll be interesting to see where they go from here, because we've identified problems even now with this program, but I think they also need to balance what the state can, afford sustainably for the long run.
Yeah, and we heard from the governor during his avail this week that this school choice is not necessarily a priority issue for him this week. But as Oseye mentioned, a lot of times these vouchers do not cover the whole cost, and can be they're obviously a benefit to families, but still families might not have full choice.
Yeah, they may not. And I think also, too, we also have to take into account, yes, because my favorite topic, Senate Enrolled Act 1, because so much money is being taken away with the property taxes and that supposed property tax relief, people are going to end up paying more for the schools based on the referendums. So we have a record number of referendums. So not only are you may have to pay extra for those additional costs with your vouchers, but if you live in one of the 38 communities that has a referendum and it passes, then you're going to be paying more for that. So it is putting putting pressure on some school districts, particularly because they've got to raise the money to cover operating expenses.
And then we've seen, here in Indianapolis, the way that this has kind of played out, it has been a different story than many rural parts of the state, but Indianapolis leaders had a bill last year and now had to change their entire structure. Could we see this happening in other communities as a result of this school choice, of the voucher changes?
If their schools are as bad as IPS, then I would hope it would. And they get a chance to improve. I mean, I think some of the last numbers were something like 13% of kids were passing both the math and English portion of the test in the Indianapolis public schools. That's insanity for the future of this city. I do love the conversation that we've had today, though, because the school choice conversation has come so far. We're sitting at this table debating whether or not we went far enough in school choice. And, oh man, should we cover the whole thing, just in case if the voucher doesn't go? 10 years ago, Laura and I sitting in this seat would have been having a very different conversation.
Lunging at each other.
Right here. But I think the state and I think Hoosiers have come to the point now where the money needs to follow the kid and not support systems that can be broken. The referendum system helps with the operational, the piece if you have a local community that wants to invest in that. But I think this is incredible progress, and hopefully we will see test results and outcomes for kids improve as a result of it.
Certainly the conversation has evolved.
Yeah, I mean, the conversation has definitely evolved, but I mean, I think back to many, many moons ago, I mean, I worked for Mayor Peterson, and he was the first mayor to have the authority to charter schools. And so watching this whole process as it goes, I think it is really hard. It is a hard discussion because it also involves kids and it involves education, and especially when you are a parent, that those decisions are just so incredibly important. And it is a community decision as well, and a community conversation. And people get really emotional and angry and attached. And I think it's a sign that we really care about it. But it also is, sometimes we also have to take the temperature down and think a little bit more rationally about it.
Difficult it is.
To that discussion of did we go far enough, it's not necessarily that I'm like, we didn't or we did. It's more that realistically, I'm looking towards like, what are those conversations at the State House going to be? Because whenever you start on a path, people are always looking then to make improvements to what they've been working on. And so I just feel like, even if that isn't a priority this year, I definitely feel like we are going to see those conversations about trying to fix these problems that people are experiencing with the program. And things always expand. Once you start on something, it always gets bigger.
And money, there's going to be a lot of talk about money for education.
Well, and the other part is too, I think anyone who's ever had, as a parent, is, as you said, you had one child go to private school, one child go to public. It's not one size fits all.
No.
And I think that that's something, especially as we are moving into this AI age and how we are even educating kids. I mean, I think we're going to see that change even more. So we have to be creative as much as possible.
Also this week, Indiana doctors are now allowed to point pregnant minors to out-of-state abortion services without fear of retribution. The ruling this week from U.S. Appeals Court finds factual information about abortions, including referrals, is protected by the First Amendment. Ben Thorpe has more.
The court ruled on a 2017 state law requiring that doctors receive parental consent before discussing abortion options with a minor. Portions of that law stayed in limbo even after the passage of the state's near-total abortion ban. Colleen McNicholas is with Planned Parenthood. She says the decision reassures doctors that they can talk about abortion services.
And in this case, it is for minors who are just seeking information about how to access abortion care, even if they can't get it in the state lines.
Doctors cannot tell patients how to get abortion drugs through the mail, but can point to states where abortion services are legal. The Indiana Attorney General's office did not respond to a request for comment.
So, Leslie, do you think this is a consequential ruling at all here in Indiana?
I would say yes. This is a ruling 10 years in the making, the lawsuits from 2017, and it's taken about this long to, reach this point. I think it's even more significant after the passage of the Indiana abortion ban, which outlaws abortions in most cases with limited exceptions, because now it's very, very likely that if you want to obtain this procedure, you have to go out of state. you cannot have it done here. And the plaintiff in this case was Planned Parenthood. They cannot perform any abortions in Indiana. Only hospitals can do so when you meet that limited exception. So I think this is a big deal for them because this is one of the few things they can do for people who are in this position. Specifically in this case, it's about providing information to pregnant minors.
Right. So
this is one of the few things they can do for children who find themselves in this situation. And other than like, I think they sometimes provide money for like transport out of state, but I think that's why it's so significant is that their actions here are pretty limited.
Well, I'd love to weigh in real quick, Lara. I mean, this was based on First Amendment, for freedom of speech.
Yeah, but I also think, too, if we just take a step back from a real practical standpoint, a pregnant minor is a very digitally savvy person. And so they will likely go to AI or to,
they can figure it out.
Yes. And so having a trusted doctor who they can at least talk to or having a trusted provider gives them much more resources than just even isolating them even more in a challenging time.
It will make a difference. Well, that is Indiana Week in Review for this week. Our panel has been Democrat Lara Beck, Republican Joey Fox, Oseye Boyd, editor-in-chief at Mirror Indy, and Leslie Bonilla Muñiz, reporter at Indiana Capital Chronicle. You can find Indiana Week in Review's podcast and episodes at WFYI.org/IWIR or on the PBS app. I'm Jill Sheridan, managing editor at WFYI. Join us next time because a lot can happen in an Indiana week. The views expressed are solely those of the panelists.
Indiana Week in Review is produced by WFYI in association with Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations. Additional support is provided by Par Ritchie.